Hi, Roly.
Ed, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. So I think, bizarrely, for a brief period of time, we were both in the Royal Navy.
Yeah, indeed. I joined in 1978, way back in the dark days. The Navy we joined back in those days was actually a bit Victorian in some ways.
Yeah, no.
About the gay band, but we'll come on to that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So I joined in 1978, yeah.
Yeah, so I joined, 1986, 1987 at Dartmouth. I suppose, I'd got increasingly, interested in the Navy. I'd started sailing and, there was that pull which has stayed with me ever since, but the pull of the sea, I guess.
The way I joined was you had the option to leave any time in the first 4 years, so I thought give it a go, see how it went, and then review if I needed to. But then never looked back. It had some great trips very early on.
Our Dartmouth training ship was a kind of unique deployment, I think, still. So we went right the way through the St. Lawrence Seaway and everything, and right the way into the Great Lakes and to Chicago and Milwaukee. So, one of the, happy memories I have from that time is the madness of having gone from Portsmouth to Chicago, on a destroyer.
Yeah, and getting paid to do it.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So did you know you were gay when you joined?
No, I was quite a late developer. I had girlfriends. I didn't come out to myself to my late 20s, by which stage I was firmly into my career. What about yourself?
I went to Sheffield University and started meeting friends who were gay. And, that was kind of my coming out, really. So I found myself in this sort of impossible position, really, of sort of half of my life was the, midshipman, Navy element of it, and the other half of it was this civilian university where Section 28 was a, big issue at the time.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of campaigning about that on campus, and I ended up having to I suppose almost live a sort of double life, and I didn't know anyone else in the forces who was gay.
Well, you wouldn't, would you? I had exactly the same. Did exactly the same thing. A double life, always looking over your shoulder about who might be listening or looking, or you had to be careful about what you said, how you said it, what you were wearing even at times.
I remember covering my face with a newspaper to go in and out of a bar, and there was there were rumours later that bars had been under surveillance, and in the 90s we discovered later on that that had actually been true.
Yeah, in Portsmouth.
Yeah, but yeah, so it was a really difficult time because I was very young, and I was set on this career, and yet another part of my life was making it impossible, really. And over a period of months, I found that harder and harder to reconcile those two elements of my life, and. So I came out. I wasn't really sure what was going to happen when I did that, but I ended up here in Portsmouth at HMS Nelson in an SIB investigation, in an interrogation room. My family didn't know that I was gay, and I'm under arrest in a naval police interrogation room, being questioned about my.
And that must have been
my life.
Harrowing, to say the least.
It was, I'm sure, other people that have been in similar experiences will know what I mean, but I seem to recall it was very sort of numbing. It was almost not clear what to do. The sense of shock, even though you kind of initiated the thing yourself, you still didn't expect that. And, the sense of shame, who could you call, who could you talk to about it? I know I had dark thoughts at that time, and it was very odd because there was no support really at all. So, you've got this young person who is clearly having the biggest crisis of their life, and I'm staying in the wardroom at Nelson with no explanation to anyone there as why I'm there and what's happening, and then I'm going across the road to spend the day being interrogated about my sex life.
And how long did that go on for?
2 days. Yeah.
Non-stop.
Yeah.
So how did you cope with that?
Well, I don't think particularly well, really. I was at the end. I suppose I found some determination. I found some grit, I think, in the end, because they asked me if they could type up the statement, because it was being handwritten, as police statements often were, and so it was being handwritten, and then they asked if they could type it up as each page was finished, because there were people that wanted to see it as soon as it was ready, as soon as I'd finished and signed it. So I said yes. So these pages were being taken out as soon as I'd answered all the questions and typed up. and then brought back to me. And it was clear that someone in command somewhere was looking at this and trying to work out what to do. And I was told that the best thing I could do was just to resign. And I think I'd assumed when I first said that I was gay that that's what was going to happen, and you know, that was where it would end up. But somehow I think on the second day, and I think it was partly just indignation about how absurd this was. I mean, this is in the 1980s,
Yep.
you know, and I'm in my 20s and I'm being questioned about my sex life by a naval policeman. You know, that didn't feel right then.
Sure.
And so I refused to resign and said I didn't see why I couldn't carry on doing my job. There was a bit of pressure suggested that I really ought to resign, and I refused to. So in the end, I was, you know, effectively suspended. I was sent home to go, and I waited months to hear what was going to happen after that.
But how did that go down with your family? What happened with
I hadn't
your
told
family?
them. I hadn't told them.
So it must have been a shock to them.
Yeah, I was trying to stay with friends in London, dropped out of university, had to, you know, find something else to do, because those months afterwards I was just wandering around London waiting to hear, you know, and wondering if I was going to be arrested again.
Sure. And then with no advice and no support and no legal representation to
No, the only thing I
explain.
heard again from the Navy was a letter that I got in the August later saying that I was being terminated on the basis that, I remember the phrase, my intended lifestyle was incompatible with that of a serving
Intended
naval officer.
lifestyle.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
This is only in the 1980s.
But you carried on. You didn't.
I was
do that.
lucky. I mean, I always say I was lucky and got away with it. In Lancaster, I was actually challenged by my commanding officer, who was a great guy, really good at naval officer, gone on really well. He and I were a great command team for the frigate. But he was told by one of the heads of department, they heard rumours about me in the wardroom. We were at sea. I always remember it was on the Saturday afternoon at sea in UK waters. XO to the captain's cabin, so I went up to see him just to talk about something. He said, I heard something, are you gay? And there and then, in that instant, I had to decide, do I throw everything away? Do I lie? Which I really did not want to do. It was something I really respected. But in that instance, I chose to lie. I said, no, I'm not. I've been supporting a friend who's been going through difficult times. I've been seen with, as it happened,
Right.
my partner, who'd come around and visit me in a couple of ports. I used to say, well, he's having trouble. I've been helping out a friend. And then they're going to have to read the ride out to the wardroom, spending gossip about the XO and how was that going to go around the ship and all the challenges we've been through together as a team, it would ruin it and all that stuff, which was, really difficult. But I got away with it. The captain accepted it. And I saw him many years later, by which stage he was a Commodore. And he didn't know. He had no inkling. But I say, got away with it for that period.
So, I mean, a few years after that, and it felt at the time like it was a long time. It was actually only 3 or 4 years after that I started the campaign to change the law, and it all became a very public thing, and it was all, in the newspapers, and I wrote a book and all of that. How did all the publicity about that affect you when you were sort of serving in secret?
Well, yeah, it was encouraging because it looked like things were going to change, but there was no guarantee. But I didn't take any firm action to be more sort of forward-leaning or anything, because it was still too much of a risk. So it was encouraging, but I didn't change my lifestyle. And even when the ban was ultimately lifted, I wasn't one of the ones that came out straight away. I thought I'd wait and see whether it was safe to do so, as it were.
So I joined Rank Outsiders, which was the support group for ex-service people, and that was a really important social space for a lot of people. We got to meet other people that had been in the forces, people that had been sacked, someone that understood. So in London in the 90s there was a really vibrant gay scene, but
Yep.
there were these people that were really damaged by something that had happened to them in the forces, and normal people didn't understand what that was. So that was a really important group, and I joined that and became quite active in it. And then in about 93, I thought it was time that we started campaigning to end this ban.
Yeah.
And so I presented at a Rank Outsiders meeting and said, we need to start campaigning on this. And much to my surprise, I was outvoted. Against, yeah.
Okay.
And I understand why. So at that point, Rank Outsiders had started talking, very quietly, but talking to the Ministry of Defence and saying, we have a helpline, there is support available, can you please pass that information to people who are being investigated and sacked? So the primary purpose of Rank Outsiders at that time was to offer support to people and have this, helpline and help people deal with it. So they were afraid that if they became a political campaigning organisation, that door would be closed, and that the Ministry of Defence wouldn't talk to them. So we sort of compromised in the end. So that my idea to be political campaigning was voted down. So instead, I set up what was called the Armed Forces Legal Challenge Group, which wasn't the most glamorous of names, but set that up. And then most of the people in Rank Outsiders became very supportive of that. And indeed, a couple of the cases, that we brought came from that. So, it meant that we had a platform for some political campaigning and for a voice. But then we had to choose the cases and persuade lawyers to come on board.
Again, that must have been difficult down selecting the best cases.
Yeah, I still have uncomfortable moments thinking about the choices, because a lot of people like me who were sacked were very damaged by it.
Sure.
And the consequences of the ban had meant that people had often got into trouble, gone absent without leave, or had got into trouble with service police. And of course, the cases we wanted to bring as the test cases, we wanted to be perfect disciplinary records, recommended for promotion. You wanted to have the PR dream for those 4 cases.
Sure.
But that's very unfair to the people who therefore weren't in that first 4 that we took to court. So that was really quite difficult. But the first case made it to court in May, I think, of '95. Okay. So. And we started making a lot of publicity about it all, which is why I'm really interested, for someone who was serving, in secret, what us being all over the radio and television newspapers going on and on about gays in the military, that must have made you feel a bit vulnerable, mustn't it?
Well, but not so much, I guess, in its own way, but also encouraged that actually there was work going on behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, to change, to have the ban lifted, have the rules changed, so that actually there was a degree of hope in the future. And even though there was obviously the legal challenges sort of staggered along over a few years.
5 years it took.
It was going in the right direction. So, yeah, you're right. It put a spotlight on the whole issue. So there were those who were, so the homophobes in the organisation would be more alert and potentially looking harder. But conversely, we had this glimmer of hope that things were starting to change. And okay, the glimmers fluttered quite a bit as the various cases went on, but as you say, we got there in the end. But yeah, a degree of vulnerability, but nothing that we hadn't been living with for years already. Although interestingly, of course, part of that double life I haven't mentioned was when I was living in Exeter with my partner at the time, fairly out in Exeter, but far enough away from the naval bases to be fairly discreet. But of course, when I had straight naval friends come to stay, I had a straight run ashore around Exeter, all the straight pubs and the sort of the lads pubs, which was great. And then when I was out with my gay friends, I had the gay night out, so the gay pubs and the gay clubs. And I just hoped that never the train would meet, sort of thing. So it sounds funny, but there was always that tension. So even in my hometown, if I was seen with people known to be gay or by people who knew I was in the military. And so I used to use my middle name with the gay crowd, because Roly is a bit distinctive. And for years I was just in the Merchant Navy, not in the Royal Navy, because just to that sort of another minor level of protection, if you like. So it carried on right up until the successful law case, which was in '99.
Military laws changed in 2000, January 2000. Yeah. So I think it was September '99 that the court ruled, so people knew it was going to change.
Yeah, exactly. And January 2000 was when Jeff Hoon made the announcement in the House of Commons.
So what happened then? Well, what did you did you just kind of go crazy?
Well, no, I was, I think I mentioned earlier, I didn't come out straight away. I sort of bided my time because I just wasn't quite sure if this was it. Even though it had been trumpeted for a long time, and my very good friend Craig Jones had been heavily involved, I think, in sort of around the corridors of power as you were doing the legal case. And he then took up the baton to get terms and conditions of service improved for the LGBT community within the military. But again, took some time. as we'd heard from Nicholas Soames, it was viewed that homosexuality was not compatible with service life. It would affect operational effectiveness, unit cohesion.
Good order and discipline would be affected, yeah.
Which, of course, was complete, I was going to use an inappropriate term, but rubbish, because, of course, there have always been homosexuals in the armed forces doing their job, quite often to an exemplary standard. So if they're there, and your argument is that, well, it's not conducive to good order and discipline, well, actually, it isn't homosexuals are the issue. It's everybody else, because it's their reaction to them, which is the challenge to operational effectiveness.
But, I mean, the security thing was quoted a lot as well, wasn't it? That we were, naturally a risk to security, and you thought, well, hang on. It's the ban that makes us a risk to security. You get rid of the ban, then there's no risk.
Yeah, you're open to blackmail by hostile intelligence services. Well, we're only open to blackmail because you're saying it's wrong to be gay. If it wasn't wrong, we wouldn't be open to blackmail. So yeah, there were a number of specious arguments which were used for decades. And yeah, the seniors at the top of the shop used those arguments against us for years. So, and that wasn't going to just switch overnight, which is why I come back to the point was, guarded in how I reacted. It took me a few years, and then gradually as things settled down, it became clear this is fixed, and the laws were changed and the rules were changed, and gradually terms and conditions of service were improved. Then I felt comfortable, and it all came to a head actually. I came out to my boss at work, my line manager, and he was a fairly senior nuclear submariner Navy captain. So he could have been a real dinosaur, old and bold and set in his ways. He wasn't. He was the complete opposite. He was a complete star, supported me massively. I was going through a fairly traumatic relationship breakup. And I sat down and had a long chat with him, and he just said, well, emotional trauma is always much more difficult to manage than operational. So I just said, well, I can handle stress. I'm great in the ops room and three-dimensional warfare, no problem. But this is tearing me to bits. And he explained all that, and we had a really good chat, and actually it was another massive relief, even though the rules had changed, the ban had been lifted, to have a senior officer sort of say to me, yeah, I've got your back, was massive. So that was really supportive and encouraging. So that was about early noughties, I guess, when I was in the MOD.
So when I started running businesses in my sort of, new life in media broadcasting in, I guess, 99, I started being a boss, and so by early 2000s, I've got quite a lot of staff and running a business, and started trying to apply, some of the principles that we tried to sort of fight for in the real world, and you realise, or I think I realised quite quickly, that this idea of having policies about equal opportunities and diversity and inclusion, as we'd call it now, it was all very easy to write the policies down and to send them around a company, but to actually create a working environment where people really do feel comfortable bringing themselves to work and respect other people's diversity is a really difficult thing. How's the Navy handling that?
Yeah, it doesn't change overnight, as we said before. It's a generational issue, and as people get used to it and grow up with it, it becomes much less of an issue. And today you've got youngsters joining who didn't even know there was a ban on being gay in the military back in the day. But yeah, it took a finite period, and gradually people realised, and the seniors realised, that actually there's a business model here that works, and people are, if they can be themselves at work, be true to themselves, they're going to work better, and that was a no-brainer really. And Admiral West, who was the first Sea Lord in the early noughties, was a huge supporter. He'd recognised early on that the ban was wrong. In 2006, we had the opportunity, we finally persuaded the system that we could to let us march in London Pride. And the Secretary of State delegated it to the single service chiefs as to whether that would be in uniform or not. And Admiral West authorised it immediately, saying he wasn't having the Navy marching in polo shirts. So there we were in our #1 uniforms with medals, looking very impressive, if I do say so myself. And the other two single services, the Army and the Air Force, it took them another 2 years to take that decision. So they were marching in matching polo shirts in 2007 and 2008. So there was I, in 2006, leading the first military contingent in uniform in London Pride. And we think that was a global first, for serving personnel to march in uniform at the Pride events. And that was just 10 years after I'd been challenged in Lancaster. So just a huge change.
I mean, you can't imagine the impact that had on people like me who'd lost their jobs. You know, to see the Navy and of course the other services, but initially just the Navy that was, you know, out there and marching and knowing that it had support from leadership at the top. You know, that was because, you know, a lot of us felt a great deal of shame. We felt embarrassed. It was something we didn't really want to talk about. It was very odd, having become successful in another career, to suddenly have to point out to people that I'd been sacked from the Navy for being gay.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of a really weird thing to talk about. And so things like that, seeing that visibility, that made a huge difference to people.
And it was a huge event. I mean, we didn't know if we were going to have eggs thrown at us, if we'd be booed out, because you didn't know how society was going to change. And I never forget it. As we turned onto Oxford Street, that first turn, where you've got these massive crowds, 10 deep, this is sort of the start of the parade, the huge cheers that went up. I'm getting my head standing up now. It's just phenomenal. I mean, it was just literally overwhelming. So all that shame sort of seemed to disappear in an instant.
It's funny you're saying about the hair bringing up. There are moments that do that, and there's one for me was I was at a Stonewall Awards ceremony in the early 2000s. I can't remember exactly when it was. And I'd just gone with a group of friends. So I'm there, and I had no idea that the Royal Navy had won an award.
Right.
So I'm sitting there with a group of friends who didn't know anything about my history on the subject. And we're drinking champagne, and then the awards start, and the second Sea Lord is brought up to take an award. Yeah. And I burst into tears.
I can relate to that, absolutely. Yeah. It's huge at the time.
Because it was like, whoa, okay. You know, that, yeah, there are few things that can help, you know, undo the damage that things like that did. You know, I was very lucky. I've had another career, but you know, other people who lost their jobs have never really recovered from it. And those kind of symbols are hugely important. But there are a lot of people who have not had that, and for whom, you know, the damage that the ban did to them is you know, lifelong. You know, and you're right, and we've both been involved in establishing Fighting with Pride, and writing, you know, chapters about, you know, our different experiences for the book. And you know, I think that provides a window for people. I mean, it's a bit of history, of course, which is, you know, for young people serving today is probably a bit eye-opening to see what you know, some of the past. But more importantly, you know, it's helping support those people who are going to need, you know, the help and support and comradeship that they've lost.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, we've made some steps recently, as you know, we're marching in gay again in London Pride. Again, we had them in a cohort of LGBT veterans who were dismissed or forced to resign, and that was a massive event for them. Joining military people, because we were all in one cohort. Yeah. Going to Wellington Barracks was a real challenge for some of them, because of course they were going to a military establishment for the first time since they'd been kicked out. You
know, I think it's worth also saying that, you know, how almost magical it seems that the Navy and the rest of the armed forces have changed to the extent that they have. You know, for me just coming here today, you know, it's quite something to be coming and, you know, checking in at the gate here at, you know, Whale Island as, you know, someone who, you know, a few gates down there, you know, I was, you know, under arrest.
Yeah.
You know, so to see the difference and know that, you know, as we came in today, you know, there were lots of people, you know, rehearsing for the coronation, you know, outside the front there, and the Navy that they're part of, you know, all those young men and women are in a very, very different Navy now.
There's no question that the armed forces in general, and Navy, because obviously we're talking dark blue, have made huge advances in the 20 plus years since the ban was lifted, and it is now a great place to be LGBT from the point of view inclusivity, and yeah, it's not perfect. Nowhere will ever be perfect. We recruit from society. Society isn't perfect, so there will always be naysayers and homophobes, but they are in the minority. And there's no question in my mind that we've made huge advances over the last 20 years from the point of view of being a great place to work when you're LGBT.
I mean, how mad is it? You know, we're sitting here, you know, having served briefly together in the mid-1980s. You with a secret career, me fired. And we're sitting here saying that, I think that, you know, if you're a, you know, member of an, you know, LGBT community now and a young person and you're looking for a career, you should look very seriously at joining the armed forces. I mean, that's just mad, isn't it?
It's talk about development. There is genuine understanding and appreciation. I don't want to whitewash it or make it sound overly rosy, but it is. I think we've made huge progress, and it's a good place to work.
It's so easy just to talk about the importance of diversity and inclusion, and it's an awful lot harder to genuinely embrace and respect those differences, and to create an environment where people really can bring their whole selves to work. And that if you can do it, makes teams stronger. Certainly in my experience.
I mean, there's no question. I think if people can be genuine, then and they're happy in the workplace, then it's a no-brainer, isn't it?